Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Christoph Heusgen, and I'm the chairman of the Munich Security Conference. The Munich Security Conference just finished a two-day European Defense Roundtable. We were able, with the Munich Security Conference, to be a couple of days guest here on beautiful Gotland and have this discussion about European defense, which is a very pertinent topic. At the same time, we are very happy as Munich Security Conference that we also are part of the Almedalen week and that we are able to participate in such a distinguished panel. We do, as Munich Security Conference for the last year, have also done something similar as Almedalen. We went with our conference through Germany. We did town halls all over the country, west, east, north, and south, because the aggression of Vladimir Putin of Russia against Ukraine has been a Zeitenwende, a turning point in history. And this raises a lot of questions about policy, about defense policy, and it certainly also has been a Zeitenwende, a turning point for your country, for Sweden, with your application to NATO. We believe it's important to do these kind of public meetings, and as I said, we are very happy that we are able to join here today, to be a co-organizer, and we do this very gladly together with our Swedish friends. So I hope that this will be a very exciting discussion, and again, thank you very much to Sweden for hosting also the Munich Security Conference here for a couple of days. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Heusgen. My name is Jakob Hallgren. I'm director of UI, the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. And let me also welcome you all warmly to this, I would say, highly topical panel discussion, unpacking Sweden's role in strengthening European defense in the context of the ongoing war in Europe. We are very happy that you, Ambassador Heusgen, and your outstanding team from the Munich Security Conference have decided to come here to Almedalen and bring not only high-level thinkers and policymakers, but also key topics and perspectives to the debate, how we better defend peace and security together. For us at UI, it's also a particular delight to co-host this event today with AFF, the Swedish Defense Association, and Anna Wieslander will soon take the floor as moderator of this session. So ever since the first contacts were taken regarding this event last fall, we have been grateful for that you from the Munich Security Conference saw the importance of holding a conversation like this in Visby and at Almedalen. Gotland is, as we all know, indeed a geostrategic location. It has been so for centuries, and it's often referred to as one of the choke points that made us in Sweden fully understand that our security is tightly linked to the security of Northern Europe and the wider European and transatlantic theaters. So as Sweden is now handing over the EU presidency to Spain, and as we are at the doorstep of NATO, I think it will be very interesting to discuss where we as Europe stand in terms of our support to Ukraine, what Sweden will bring in terms of strengthening European defense cooperation, and what the imminent Swedish NATO accession will actually entail. Security and defense affairs have indeed risen to the top of our domestic debate in Sweden for many reasons, and most notably, of course, as a result of all the ramifications of Russia's war of choice in Ukraine, I would say. So linking the important Swedish national conversations at Almedalen with European and transatlantic perspectives is, in my view, a necessary and I hope maybe a continued element in Almedalen. So we have a most distinguished panel available to address these issues today, and are of course utterly pleased that Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson will kick off the discussion with a keynote address. This will be followed by interventions by Foreign Minister Billström, Minister of Defense Pål Jonson, former Europe Minister and now Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Tytti Tuppurainen, and Saab CEO Micael Johansson. So thank you so much to you and the panel for being here, and welcome all again to you in the audience who have made it to come here. And with this, I give the floor to our eminent moderator, Anna Wieslander. Please, Anna.
Thank you so much for that, Jacob. It's wonderful to be here and to have you all gathered here. I represent Allmänna Försvarsföreningen. Just want to make a small pitch that this is an organization for ordinary people. So if you're interested in defense and security, you can become a member and take part of our activities. And we have some staff here. You can do it immediately after the event. As we are speaking on these serious issues, Russia's ongoing war and an increasing awareness that we need to take defense and security not serious, but very, very serious. It is my great pleasure and honor to introduce our keynote speaker for this event, the Prime Minister of Sweden, Ulf Kristersson. Welcome. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you for that kind introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be here. And it's an honor to have Munich Security Conference on Swedish soil this time. I really appreciated my presence in Munich earlier this year. Great conference, very many good conversations. And I cannot think of a better place to continue those discussions than on this very particular island, strategically important for our national defense in Sweden and for our common European future allies across the sea. There are so many strong connections to Ukraine here as well, as Gotland became a new home for many of those who left Gammal Svensk By. Try to pronounce that one, Gammal Svensk By. An old Swedish settlement along the Dnieper River during different periods of the 1900s. And since the full-scale war began last year, we are once again reminded of how close we are in so many senses, geographically, but also all other senses. Let me start off by stating the obvious. We take our role in strengthening European security and defense very seriously, just to have stated that. The current Swedish EU presidency, ending in just a few days. I'm going to Brussels later tonight to attend the final European Council during our presidency, continues a long-standing tradition of active engagement. For decades, we have supported peace and stability in Europe and beyond. As Foreign Minister, Carl Bildt played an instrumental role in establishing the Eastern Partnership, strengthening the prospects for EU integration. And long before that, in the beginning of the 1990s, we played an important role in supporting the Baltic states as they regained independence from Soviet oppression. Their accession to EU and to NATO in 2004 made us all safer, as will Finland's and Sweden's NATO accession do as well. Today, Europe is facing its greatest security challenges since the Second World War. The defining focus for my government since taking office 8 months ago has been to strengthen support to Ukrainian friends in need. We decided almost overnight to get rid of an almost bizarre legacy of not being able to support a country with military equipment when they needed weapons the most. Instead, we have brought together an almost unanimous parliament to back substantial military support, including main battle tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, advanced air defense systems, anti-tank weapons and other military equipment. And we do that proudly. We do it for them, but we do it also for ourselves, because the Ukrainians are courageously defending not only their own country, but also our security. Our support will continue as long as it takes. As an ally, Sweden will contribute substantially to security across NATO with a 360-degree approach. We will provide air and maritime coordination and surveillance. We will also participate in NATO's air policing with our excellent Gripen aircrafts, and we are prepared to provide land forces to NATO's defense, especially in the Baltic states through the enhanced forward presence. Sweden has an array of capabilities, from global eye surveillance aircraft, exceptional submarines, high-quality special forces, and civilian defense capabilities. Our defense industry is a strategic asset, as are our intelligence services and cyber capabilities. Furthermore, Sweden will be a hub for logistical support and will provide strategic depth for the alliance. Sweden's foreign policy is best pursued together with other countries that share our values. This takes place in the EU and, not least, together with our Nordic-Baltic neighbors. Closer and stronger Nordic-Baltic cooperation is essential. As we enter NATO, our EU membership will remain as relevant as before. And there is room for Sweden to be even more active in shaping the future direction of the EU, including on security and defense. During the Swedish EU presidency, we have summarized our efforts in 3 key words to help make Europe greener, safer, and freer. Greener, safer, and freer. The main focus has, of course, been on supporting Ukraine and responding strongly to Russia while maintaining EU and transatlantic unity. We have taken important steps in the cooperation between the EU and the US, not least when it comes to trade and technology. In all these aspects, transatlantic cooperation is and must be a cornerstone for the EU. We have also made great progress on other important issues related to security, not least with the climate package with the odd name Fit for 55. Europe has now, under the Swedish EU presidency, taken on an important leadership role in the fight against climate change. We have also taken steps towards better migration regulations. Internal security is another area where we have enhanced security for our citizens. Here at home, we are drastically increasing our defense budget with a view to further strengthen our armed forces, and we are rebuilding the civil defense. Work has begun on a new national security strategy. Meanwhile, technology is shaping the most aspects of our lives, and AI will amplify that. It will impact how we interact and how we work and how we defend ourselves. Tech will also make us more efficient and productive. We will find new solutions to energy management and production and new materials. Precision medicine and clean tech will give us hope, and our investments in tech will promote both our competitiveness and our safety. It is simply imperative that Sweden and Europe end up at the forefront in this global development. To conclude, national, European and transatlantic security are top priorities for this government. And finally, Sweden is, we know that, a small country. We compete with qualities like curiosity, innovation and ingenuity. We have many friends around the world, and we cherish values like democracy, freedom, and creativity. We frankly and willingly admit that we want the common protection of NATO, but we are not shy. We know that we also have a lot to bring to NATO. As a member, we will be a security provider in this part of the world. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Prime Minister, thank you so much. And we will now move into our panel discussion. And I just want to announce in advance that we will take questions from the audience. So please, prepare in your mind. And after a while of discussion, we will also, raise your hand, and there will be a microphone because we are broadcasting this. So and we will make sure and hope to get as many of you into the discussion as well. But with that, I would like to welcome our panel's participants up to the stage. And you have Foreign Minister Tobias Billström here. Welcome. Defense Minister Pål Jonson here. Chair of the Finnish Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee, Tytti Tuppurainen. Welcome here. And then the President and CEO of Saab, Micael Johansson. Welcome. So we are, as we heard, at the end of Sweden's EU presidency, and we are also 2 weeks ahead of the NATO summit in Vilnius. So these are indeed very important times to take stock on where we are when it comes to European defense and security and what Sweden is contributing in this regard. And I wanted to start with Foreign Minister Billström, because Sweden has been now leading the EU with the EU presidency. We heard that there is a last council meeting tomorrow, so this is rounding up. But it's been an extraordinary time for Sweden to lead the work in the EU with the war in Ukraine and a unity that we perhaps have not seen for many years. But how do you assess what kind of difference can Sweden or has Sweden made, do you think? What's your experience during these 6 months of having the presidency in such urgent times? What difference has Sweden made that you're proud of, and what would you like to see more?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Of course, if I were to make a list, it would be quite a long list, but I will try to limit myself to some important observations. One, I think, is, and you mentioned it very eloquently, Anna, the question about unity. We have been able to maintain unity among EU member states in the support for Ukraine, and we have done so in a very practical way. I would like to emphasize, of course, the sanctions. We delivered the 11th sanctions package, which was decided upon at the Foreign Affairs Council meeting in Luxembourg now on Monday. We have also been able to continue to top up the EPF, the European Peace Facility, in order to enable Ukraine to get a steady supply of weapons. And we have embarked on something which the EU have never tried before, namely to become an ammunitions provider to Ukraine, something which is completely new. But where I have to say, and probably Paul will be able to elaborate a bit more on the details, we have been able to make a very steady progress over these last 6 months. So I'm very proud of this fact, that we have been able to stand side by side with Ukraine, providing militarily, political, humanitarian and financial support all throughout these 6 months. That's our contribution, and the one which I and the Swedish government is most proud of.
And what has been the most tricky part? Can you give us something on, just give us a temperature of, has it been smooth in working like this? Or, I mean, what do you face when you lead?
Oh, well, the EU is always tricky. That's part and parcel of the whole question, because you have the will of the member states, you have the Commission, and of course also you have the European Parliament. But in all this complexity, of course, there have been moments where the process has stopped up, and you have had to go into those deliberations in working groups, etc. But I mean, although, again, both with the EPF and the munitions, there were pauses, we were able to move on and complete the negotiations and the deliberations and arrive at a sensible decision. So I'm not going to point to a certain point in time over these 6 months. I'm merely going to state that we have been able to get the ship moving forward. And that's what the presidency is all about. The presidency is about maintaining unity.
And it's a big group, 27 member states. Pål Jonson, a defense minister, I would like for you to pick up on this whole change setting that we are facing actually with a war, Russia's aggression towards Ukraine and raising warfare in Europe to new levels that we have not seen here since basically the Second World War. And that has, of course, stirred around many things, but it has created a sense of urgency, which I think has contributed to the unity that we have seen, but also a need for speed. And you are in the middle of all this, because there is a need for speed in very many dimensions. Sweden decided to increase defense spending to 2% of GDP as soon as possible last year. And then, of course, the needs that Ukraine has when it comes to deliveries and training, but also building our own defense. What are the big challenges that you see, and how do you address all these challenges at the same time in your role?
Sure. The hard fact of the matter is that large-scale war is back in Europe again, and that sharpens the mind, and it forces us also to operate and do things differently. I think what's gotten us so far, we're in a situation now where Russia controls less than 20% out of Ukraine. I think what has gotten us so far is three things. It's the will of the Ukrainian armed forces to fight, and they've been tremendously inspiring for us to be able to follow that. The second thing is, of course, the resilience of the Ukrainian population, which has been remarkable, also a source of inspiration. And the third, of course, has been the fact that we have never ever has the EU and NATO cooperated so closely together, and I think that the Western arms supplies to Ukraine has been absolutely critical. Just as Tobias, I've been to Ukraine, and you talk to the Ukrainian soldiers, and I met the force commander of Mykolaiv, and he said, when I got an NLAW instead of a Russian RPG, I knew when I was sending out my soldier, he had a 7 times better chance of surviving. So I think those things have really been crucial, and the unity, as Tobias was talking about, is crucial, and the speed. But it forces us, of course, to operate in a different way, because the demands from the war and also being able to keep up supporting Ukraine means that our normal operating procedure, for example, in the deliberations for when we can send the tanks, when we can send the IFF weaves and the Archer system, that also has to be speeded up. Tremendously rewarding also to meet Ukrainian soldiers when we train them both in Sweden and elsewhere. Very highly motivated, quick learners. They work not 9 to 5, but they work all day around, and therefore we have to adopt the way how we train them as well to provide them the best possible support.
Two things that struck me during last year was, shifts that Sweden did, I think. In the beginning, we were not alone, but Ukraine, told us, and correctly, that sending weapons is not charity. It's about survival. It's about following the UN Charter and the need and right to protect yourself. But there was a feeling in general, you could hear it in several European states, also in Sweden, that we don't have that much. What we need, and it's a dangerous situation out there, so we need what we have at home. And then that started to shift. And the second thing that also shifted, I think, has been what you're referring to. How fast can you deploy a system or troops and so on the ground? Yeah. And that has been revolutionary, because already Ukraine was asking for weapons and support already before the invasion, and many said, no, this is already too late because it will not be operational until then and then. And this whole thing has shifted. How does those lessons learned affect the way you think Sweden will build its defense forward? Because it's pretty fundamental changes in approach.
Sure. What we've done in the Rammstein format, I think, is quite impressive. We've been able, within a few months, to provide the Ukrainians with hundreds of tanks, thousands of infantry vehicles, and hundreds of artillery systems. And we were able, within a few months, actually to train and equip 9 brigades. And that's a major accomplishment, which thanks to strong US leadership in the Rammstein format, has been very, very important. And in the beginning of the war, it was providing the Ukrainian weapons to defend themselves, light arms and also for RPGs. And now we're focusing, of course, of letting the Ukrainians having the capabilities in order to regain their territory and the freedom. So that's why we go for heavy and more advanced weapon systems. There's many lessons to be learned from the war in Ukraine. I think we really have to pay attention and learn as much as possible here. Of course, it all starts with the most fundamental thing in warfare, and that's the will to fight. We can provide whatever weapon systems. That's great with technology, but if you don't have the will to fight, you will not win. The other thing I think we learned as well is the importance of long-range strike capabilities. We've been seeing how the Russians been operating with that, attacking electricity grid and civilian infrastructure mercilessly all over Ukraine. Long-range strike capabilities, air defense systems, extremely important. And of course the use of drones. Now we've seen drones operating before in Yemen, we've seen them in Afghanistan, in Syria, and Armenia and Azerbaijan, but systematically operating drones, I think it's some of the things that we're learning for and observing as well. Last point, I think what we are also learning from this war is that this war is about high tech and technology, space-based assets, having intelligence from satellites, having secure communication, Starlinks. That's all important, but this war is also about scale, and volumes as well, and therefore, to a certain degree, this is a war of warehouses, and we also have to make sure that we have a strong security supply and a stronger defense industrial base in Europe in order to supply weapons for Ukraine for the long haul.
Thank you, and that leads me over to the defense industrial side, because if we have this chain of the political and the defense policy, and then on the other end, or part of this is, of course, industry, defense industry. As the CEO of Saab, how has the setting changed for Swedish and European defense industry in this year? That has been overwhelming also in that part. You were I was just talking to an investor here at lunch, and he said that we did not invest in defense companies at all before, and now we have shifted because we view defense industry differently. So that's one dimension, but also, of course, production and demand and all kinds of tricky questions for you.
No, of course, I mean, being in the defense industry today is very much here and now, and about capacity and increasing quickly production capacity of many conventional things that we didn't have sort of capacity to do. We are trying to move from a completely peacetime type of mindset to quickly now get to actually looking upon things as supporting a war, be prepared for war, have much higher stockpiles of things. And this is complicated to achieve quickly, so to say, at the same time as investing for the future. Of course, we have lots of work to do. We're growing incredibly fast as a company now, but it's not really with a smile on my face, because it actually took a tragic war in Ukraine, in Europe, to make this happen. I do think it's a sound wake-up call to many European countries, and we have so much to do now to step up and do more sovereign capability in Europe. So the view on defense industry, if you think about the taxonomy thing that we saw in Brussels being discussed, is defense industry sustainable type of businesses? That's gone right now. It's sort of, yes, we are an important integrated part of resilience and deterrence in our societies and protecting people and societies. So it's a completely new situation as a defense industry now, and we are investing heavily, of course, in supporting our defense forces in Europe and in Sweden, of course. We do that at risk still, but what we need is, of course, to set new ambition levels. What does it actually mean to go from a peacetime type of mindset to be prepared for war and conflict and support the war? We need those sort of targets to invest quickly to new levels. So I've been with the company for 38 years. I've never experienced something like this as what we've seen during the last 2 years now. I think we should be happy to say something. I'm really pleased to hear our Prime Minister talking about the collective defense of Europe and support of NATO. I think we should be happy and think about that we have a strong defense industry in our country, which have developed high-tech things that are actually tailored for the threat that we're viewing now, Russia. And that adds a lot of value also stepping into NATO, hopefully soon, that we actually bring with us that technology and those tailored systems. So I can talk for long about this, but it's a completely different situation, of course.
I wanted to get your assessment also, or reflections on the European Union has moved forward a lot on defense and in a more perhaps realistic way and also applied instruments that were created more in our mind for crisis management elsewhere, or international operations to the war in Ukraine. I'm thinking of the European Peace Facility, for instance, in order to speed up procurement of ammunition. You also have other joint procurement initiatives, ADEPA, and additional ammunitions kind of incentives. And these are, of course, billions of euros, so it's not very small money, but I mean, to give us a sense of, I mean, what does this mean for industry, given the, you know, what's on your mind? How important are these initiatives for you, and what difference does it really make?
No, I welcome these incentives or initiatives to collaborate between European industries, of course, but also funding growth and funding capabilities. There are a few things left to be done, though. I mean, it's good political incentives, but it's not so much clarity on how you actually access the funds, who will be actually acquiring the things. How do you go about it in terms of collaborating between countries and industries? What are the regulations actually to get to the real projects? We need to quickly get there. And now we have set a few incentives within Europe that are really good. I support them 100%, but it's not easy as industries. And I'm not the only one being the CEO of a defense industry trying to understand how do you access these funds and get things going. I fully support that. Then I think the coordination between the only alliance that can actually work with strategy apart from member states and the defense planning process is NATO. So what we do in these incentives in Europe, started by the EU Commission, must be harmonized and coordinated to where we want to go within the alliance, but also as member states. That's still to be done, but in generally speaking, great incentives and initiatives, but we have still some work to do.
And EU and NATO has been mentioned several times here already, and we, Sweden and Finland, were supposed and planned to join NATO hand in hand. This is also one effect of Russia's war on Ukraine. But then, well, you can say perhaps Turkey wanted it differently, and that meant that Finland could move ahead and become a full member. Actually, on the birthday of NATO, 4th of April, its 74th birthday. So that was a historic day in many ways. So Tutti, for you, we also heard at that time Finnish President Sauli Niinistö, who's been very active in this whole process, he said that Finland's membership is not complete without Sweden. What did he mean by that, and how do you view Sweden's role, but also Finland's new membership? What does this mean for you and for European security?
Well, first of all, it of course feels great to be here in Sweden as a newborn, fresh NATO member state. And if there's one country in the world who passionately wants Sweden to be a full member in NATO as soon as possible, it is Finland. And we desperately want that. And I fully agree with the statement of our president. Our NATO membership is not yet completed without Sweden being in NATO. And why is that? Why is Finland so keen on Sweden's NATO accession? And there are good reasons for that. First, we all know and we consider that Sweden actually is a very strong country if you take military capabilities. We sometimes tend to be too critical. Sometimes in Finland and sometimes in Sweden, we don't realize how strong Sweden actually is when it comes to technology, innovation, military industries, defense industries, and the capabilities. And we can draw a lesson from history. The era after the Cold War, it was not the first time when Sweden started dismantling its military capabilities, thinking that a large-scale military conflict is not likely. It was also after the First World War, when Sweden thought that we could spend less in the army. But then, during the Second World War, and especially after the Second World War, it was actually quite a rapid development when Sweden scaled up, ramped up its military capabilities. And it's already 1950s when Sweden had a very developed air force. So we believe that Sweden will deliver with a strong capability to the whole alliance, and especially for us Finns. And the second issue why it is so significant for Finland is, of course, Baltic Sea region. I mean, the idea of Finland starving to death without free sea lanes in the Baltic Sea is not far-fetched. We are dependent, our economy is dependent on the sea routes in the Baltic Sea, and that's why we really hope that Sweden will be in NATO soon, because after that we will have Sweden taking care of the coastline of the Baltic Sea, and of course the Swedish Navy taking care of the Baltic Sea. And after the Swedish accession, 9/10 of the coast of the Baltic Sea would be covered by allied countries. And that, I think, would deter any future Russian aggression in the Baltic Sea region. So for our survival, Swedish accession in NATO is crucial, and therefore we think that it's not complete unless Sweden will swiftly join NATO.
There is also an area up north, the Arctic, where Sweden and Finland have
Indeed.
a special contribution to make.
Yes. Once we have both Nordic countries in NATO, it will provide with more credibility in the high north. It will create more strategic depth to the whole alliance, and it will provide with more presence in the Arctic region. I think it's worth noting, because the superpower competition, it is taking place in the Arctic region, and it's important that NATO also is more relevant in that part of the globe.
And NATO summit is coming up. Do you believe that Sweden will be a member by the NATO summit in Vilnius?
I firmly believe so. We have been long-standing. Sweden is the closest country to Finland. It is our previous motherland. So we kind of feel very strongly for Sweden. And for many years we have been together in the European Union. Congratulations for your very successful presidency. And we wish very soon that we are also allied. But until then, of course, the EU is also relevant. It is also a security provider, and I think it is worth noting that we also need to invest in the EU's capacity as security provider, and there Sweden can provide with more security to Europe as a member state of the EU. The task is not over until when you are in NATO. We still need to make sure that this continent is more credible in taking care of its own business when it comes to security and defense. We need more strategic autonomy. We need to strengthen the European pillar of NATO, and I think Sweden will bring a crucial added value to that.
And that I, of course, have to ask our ministers, what are your expectations for the NATO summit in this regard and also more broadly, if you want to comment?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. And of course, this is part and parcel of the whole project, but we know that Sweden and Finland are security providers together, but also that without Sweden being part of NATO, it will be very difficult to complete the project of securing this part of the northern flank of NATO. But yes, we still have a very clear goal for Vilnius, as the government has had ever since we took up office in October last year. That is to become members at the Vilnius summit at the latest. And we're working with this. We have fulfilled all the commitments laid down in the memorandum that was signed during the NATO summit in Madrid last year. And we also now hope that we will have a meeting with the permanent joint mechanism within a few days, where both Sweden, Finland and Turkey will participate. And finally, we will see the summit come through. We are ready, and we hope that all other NATO members as well recognize this. And it is my firm belief, I'm talking with counterparts and colleagues every day. Yesterday I stood over there with the Foreign Minister of the UK, who firmly declared that Sweden belongs in the NATO and that they want us to join the alliance at the Vilnius summit. We have heard the American President Biden and the Foreign Secretary Tony Blinken declare especially Tony Blinken during his meeting here in Sweden, that the United States also firmly believe that Sweden should join the alliance at Vilnius. With that strong support backing us, we feel that we are credible in every aspect.
No, I totally concur with Tobias. I think also what's important is that Vilnius will be a very important stepping stone for the alliance, deterrence and defense agenda, and what NATO is doing right now, especially under the leadership of General Cavoli, is strengthening the regional plans. And then, of course, they have something called the NATO's new force model. So you're connecting new forces together with the regional plans, and then they're reviewing the command and control structure. Why am I saying this? Well, if Sweden cannot be part of NATO's regional plans and be a security provider until we're a full-fledged member of the alliance. And I think for the defendability of Finland and the Baltic state and the whole Northern Europe, it makes eminent sense that also Sweden is integrated into NATO's common defense planning. So I think that's crucial a time when we hope that NATO will, of course, be a strong point for having unity and strengthening NATO's deterrence, which is absolutely pivotal due to the deteriorating security environment because of Russia's aggression against Ukraine.
Thank you. And I will open up the floor now, I think, from questions from the audience. And I'm sorry I have my back towards some of you, but I will try and stay here. So there, and just wait for the microphone.
Yeah, Irina Kuznetsova from Latvia, co-founder of Latin Democracy Festival. So if Turkey still blocks accession of Sweden to NATO, so what are the next steps? Because I have some doubts that because they have been promising kind of that when election passes, so the Turkey will be the Sweden will be accepted to NATO, but not anymore. So if there is still a kind of a blockage. What are the next steps?
Thank you very much. I think Minister Billström.
Well, thank you very much for the question. I'll just move around so I can see you. Thank you. I think this question, shows that you have to be, very clear on your goal. I don't think that it will do neither Sweden's application or the whole process within the NATO any good if I started talking about alternatives. We have one goal, and that is to become members at Vilnius, full stop. And any other talks on the fringes of this will only lead to confusion about what Sweden's real goal is. Having said this, again, I think that with the strong support that we have from our allies, the commitments, the understanding which both Pål and our Finnish colleague have outlined, I believe that NATO is also ready to accept us and that we will find a solution in the fullness of time, which is the Vilnius summit.
Thank you. Question here? Yes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ruben. I'm an entrepreneur. One of the questions that I had for the panel was how have the developments in Russia of last week changed the situation? What is your perspective on that?
Thank you. Good question. What unfolded? Yes.
Of course, it's premature to say anything too sure about the development in Russia, but what the events have shown is that autocracies are stable for just as long as they are stable. So change of paradigm might take place, and this event with Prigozhin and Wagner troops have shown that Putin is weak. He obviously is weak, and a change is possible. He don't control all the armed forces, all the troops of armed forces in Russia. And of course, as a neighboring country to Russia, we hope for the best, that something could take place, which is hard to define what that would be, but something would take place that would provide an opportunity for a change in Russia. And let us remember from the history that sometimes when big revolutions have happened, when Russia has been defeated in war in Crimea 1855 or Russo-Japanese War 1905, it provided with a sort of window of change in Russia. So if Russia is now perhaps in a moment where a change could trigger, it could provide with something better. At least we should have high hopes for that. And until then, keep on supporting Ukraine, because the war is being waged and it will be solved on the battlefield. It will be not solved by diplomacy or politics. It will be solved on the battlefield, and we need to keep on supporting Ukraine and provide with tangible security guarantees in the Vilnius summit.
I think that's a very important point. Let's not, this was an internal Russian matter. Let us not lose focus on supporting Ukraine. This is really a pivotal moment at the war. The Ukrainians are conducting the counter offensive, and I think what is really important now that also we provide solutions for the Ukrainians also we built together with the international community 9 brigades plus 3 brigades. Let's make sure we also that the Ukrainians can achieve operational effect with those brigades, and that we can do by assuring good logistics, good supplies, and good sustainment of those platforms and systems, so the Ukrainians can really be successful. Because sometimes people underestimate the complexity of what we're doing. It's not just sending the Ukrainians tanks. You have to make sure that those tanks can communicate and that they're interoperable. You can have to assure also that the Ukrainians are able to operate the system, and it's quite challenging, doing combined arms and combining both tanks and artillery systems and so forth. And we also have to have strategic patience and of course assuring the Ukrainians they don't have to prove themselves every time on the battlefield. I think that's really crucial. And we also have to think what we're going to do for the long term of continuing supporting Ukraine as long as it takes for them to regain their territorial integrity and their freedom.
Would you like to comment on Russia?
I totally agree, and I think that the most important thing is to remember that this is an internal matter of Russia. We should not allow Russia to build a narrative that the West has somehow conceived or been involved in this. I also would just like to add to what Pål just said, the need also to look to the future for Ukraine, the reconstruction of the country, the rebuilding of the country, a process which has to move forward as we speak. Because after all, doing that is also a way of securing a prosperous and free Ukraine after the war. So we can't just wait until the end of the war and for peace negotiations to start. We have to start that process already now. And there I think that the European Union plays a very important part, but also individual member states and the transatlantic link is very important in this regard as well. So many things that should be done. One thing which I would like to highlight, which falls into the sphere of both Pål and myself, is minesweeping. The fact that so much of the countryside in Ukraine and the waters outside of Odessa have been mined. And if Ukraine is to be able to to get its agricultural production going. It's something which is very important. It will provide the very sound economic basis for the country in a very short time if we are able to do this. And if we combine this with mine-sweeping operations to move away the threat towards commercial shipping, we will make a substantial contribution to the economy of Ukraine. And this is exactly what we should do.
Do you foresee that defense industry has a role in the reconstruction or the kind of consolidation of Ukraine when we have a different situation? Hopefully, some more peaceful situation.
No, absolutely. I mean, just sort of connecting to how much sort of sweeping and destroying and finding of dangerous things in sort of both in the sea and at land. Of course, we can support that, but also I think the continuity of building a local sovereign capability in Ukraine needs industrial collaboration. They also have defense industries. It's not so easy to work with them now, but we have to start that process for them to have a deterrence and resilience in their society going forward. So we have a role in that process as well, definitely.
More questions?
Behind.
Yes, over here and here. Oh, several. Wow. Okay. Let's see. Let's take a few then. Yes. Is there a microphone?
I
you
got
have
one.
Perfect.
René Back is my name, from Germany. I have a question regarding the future. Today we're talking about the looking back what we have done. How could you imagine, if you have a wish list, could an end scenario look there? How could we stabilize the situation on the eastern side of Europe for the next 20, 30 years?
Thank you. I think we take a few questions so that we can get in. Yes, please.
One more question referring to the previous one about Wagner Group. I'm Anastasia Bilenko, Ukrainian refugee here on Gotland and also volunteer for refugees here on Gotland. And my question is, as a person who fled from the war, I'm full of doubts and suspicious and so on. And there is a talk that all this thing with Prigozhin, Wagner Group, it was just a theater, especially after some kind of agreement with Lukashenko. And there is a talk that it could be just a theater to bring forces to the north part and start attack to the north part of Ukraine. My question is how real this threat is, and if we are expecting the worst scenario that it is happening, what kind of steps is preparing by Europe and Sweden?
Thank you. Take one more question and then we'll see what we can. One more question.
My name is Elena. I'm also from Ukraine. I'm here like a Ukrainian refugee and also a volunteer. I have just short question. Dear ministers and politics of Sweden, ladies and gentlemen, do you believe in the victory of Ukrainian people and Ukraine is in this war?
Thank you very much. So a bit on the long-term security vision, you can say, for Europe. Wants to start, Titi?
Very shortly, I believe that the long-term goal in order to stabilize our continent is for the EU to succeed and for the EU to enlarge. I think the enlargement to Ukraine and Republic of Moldova and the countries in the Western Balkans, I think that is both a good thing and inevitable. And that will further stabilize the situation because, of course, NATO and EU are complementary yet very different. EU provides with economic growth and prosperity, rule of law, democracy, all the issues that actually Ukraine is fighting for. And yes, you are going to win, no doubt about that. You will beat Russia and you will gain your territorial freedom and independence, that's for sure. So enlargement is an issue that has to take place, and I'd like to refer very shortly to the speech of President Macron he gave in Bratislava Klopsek, because I think that's the third Zeitenwende that we've seen. First was, of course, the German Zeitenwende. Second was Finland's and Sweden's application to NATO. And I think Macron's and the changing stance of France towards enlargement is the third Zeitenwende. So that's good news for our people.
Well, I think on the long-term vision of the 30, 40, what do we want to accomplish? And I think it's very important that we don't lose our vision. What we want to accomplish is a Europe all free and united, where all countries have the right to choose their own path to security, including if they want to become EU or NATO membership. That's the kind of Europe I want, and that's the kind of Europe I want my kids to grow up. So that let's not go back to buffer zone spheres of interest. Europe tried that before, it failed miserably. So let's not lose the vision on that. Now on Ukrainian victory, well, in the beginning of the war, the Ukrainians were terribly outgunned in the battle for Kiev, and they still won the battle of Kiev. They won the bigger battle of Mykolaiv, they won the battle of Snake Island, they won the battle of Kherson, and they won several other battles. I mean, we are in a situation right now where Russia is really, to my mind, fighting a losing battle, and it's on the retreat. So let's continue supporting Ukraine so it can regain its territorial integrity and freedom. And by doing that, we're not just helping Ukraine, we're really investing into our own security, because if Russia would have won this war, we would have had enormously many more problems. So it's really the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do.
So let's continue to support Ukraine, and Ukraine will win. I think that will end the discussion, and I'm want everyone to join me in thanking the panel. I will leave the last words to Chairman Huisken.
Yes, I think this was a wonderful panel. It felt a bit like being at the Munich Security Conference. But it takes place at a different place. We are here in St. Nicolai's Church, which actually almost 500 years ago was actually destroyed by a German army coming from Lübeck, which, by the way, was in a Danish-Swedish war, and the Germans were siding with the Swedes, just to say that. Now,
happy that you clarified.
Carl Bildt, who is sitting over there, could give a lecture about this. But the fact that this church has turned from a church which has been destroyed to a church now where we have discussions like this one bears testament of where we have come in Europe since these dark ages. And we are faced today with a situation where not that far away, and we have some Ukrainians sitting among us, that we are witnessing right now a war in the middle of Europe, which Russia wages against Ukraine, where again churches, museums, cities, civil infrastructure are destroyed. I think it shows how important it is that we all work together, that Europe works together, and in this spirit I hope that the NATO summit will be successful in a couple of weeks. We are sitting here together to talk to people. The question that you got were similar to the ones that we get in Germany as well. It is very important that in our fight against this aggression, we stick together as populations, that we stick together in Europe. And as I said, it was wonderful for us, Munich Security Conference, to partner with you here in this event. And I can only congratulate you on the institution of the Almedalen week, where you have these kind of discussions. So thank you very, very much. I hope that soon in Ukraine there will be reconstruction, and if there will be some churches left destroyed, I hope that in Ukraine a church like this will serve the same purpose as we have in Berlin with the Gedächtniskirche or the Nicolai Church here. So again, thank you very much. Thanks very much for having had a chance to partner with you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.